Welcome everyone to session 1B. I'm Jennifer Slinkard. I'm the Eastern representative for Oregon TESOL. I'm here in LeGrand this morning. I'll be monitoring the chat and supporting our presenter as needed. And as you probably just heard, remember that this session is being recorded. And we're pleased to have Tim Krause from Portland Community College with us today. His presentation is called Leveling Up the Literary Circle for Remote Teaching. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Tim. And if you have questions while he's presenting, please feel free to just put them in the chat, or you can hold them until the end if you prefer.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you. Hello, well, good morning, everyone. This is Leveling Up for the Literary Circle for Remote Learning, and we're going to talk about some variations to this trusty idea of literary circle discussion methods that have worked really well, including sort of a new variation that I've started working on Zoom when we went to remote learning, and I thought that's an interesting variation to take a look at. So my name is Tim Krause, and I teach ESOL at Portland Community College, and I also teach online for the Open University of Catalonia. And so I sort of have some experience both in the classroom, on Zoom, and then just regular online asynchronous courses. Now, when we talk about literary circles, we're want to clarify just a little bit where we're starting. So literary circles are a type of small group discussion, right? They can be like a little book clubs that meet every week. And this is usually or often in the K-12 environment anyway, built around a student choice of books. A group chooses a book and they read it and they talk about it. But it works really well when your class also is reading just the same novel like I do in my class. And the big idea with literary circles is really that each student is given a specific role or responsibility in their small group discussion. And those roles or those jobs often come with materials to help them prepare for their discussion. So if you Google literary circles, you're going to find many examples of this, mostly for the K-12 world, because there are so many ways to sort of apply this principle of this kind of small group discussion. And when I first heard about these literary circles, I thought, wow, that's such a gimmick. That's such a gimmick. It's too structured. It's too weird kind of way to get people talking. And but now I'm a convert. I've been doing this for several years now, and I've really seen a huge a huge degree of participation and collaboration from my students. And when I see the notes they take and the information they're looking at and the questions they're asking, I've totally converted to this for my reading classes. So today I want to show you some examples of how my materials have evolved over the past years, ending with how I've now adjusted them for online learning or remote learning specifically. But just remember that you can tailor these. You could start at level 1 and that would be just fine. I'm just going to show you the different versions that I've practiced over the years. And it's just a principle really that you can adapt for your own class, your own environment, and your own teaching style. The thing they all share, of course, though, is that you're assigning roles to students and they're bringing information to the discussion. That's sort of the key part. But if we go up from level to level, that was level 1. In level 2, I turned it into a jigsaw. And level 3, I've taken this idea of splitting the note taking or splitting the record keeping, let's say. And then in level 4 is the remote area where I've added into some actions into Google Docs. So we used Google Docs to actually collaborate in the remote environment. So let's start with level 1. So a level 1, it's all about assigning rotating roles and or responsibilities or jobs, whatever you want to call it. And each literary circle for me usually has 4 to 6 different roles. And since we know, I chose that because we know, 4 to 6 is really an ideal size for small group discussions. 6, 7, 8 tends to be too many. 1, 2, 3 tends to be too few. So I try to focus on 4 to 6 roles. And I usually choose this also based on the number of students I have in my class. So, what makes a good size group when we divide up the class, but usually no less than 4 and no more than 6. And then for each reading task, like a section or a chapter or a short story, whatever you're working on that week, a student will have maybe role A this week, role B the next week, role C the next week, and the following week, and so on. So everyone rotates through these different roles or jobs and can experience different methods of that literary inquiry. For example, one person might focus on plot, one person might focus on theme, all those kinds of things. And people rotate through the jobs in order to take a look at some literary text from many different angles. So just this first step, giving students these sort of different tasks or roles or jobs to play, I've noticed that it really increased the quality of participation and the quality of sort of assessment, not assessment, analysis of the literary text that we're using in the class. So if I take a look at some common roles to share with you, again, if you Google these, if you Google literary circles, you're going to find so many different possible roles that you can choose from. And you just choose what you want to focus on. Like, do you want students to focus on the nuts and bolts, so say plot, or do you want students to focus more on some more higher up thinking like symbolism and things like that? You could even choose a grammar analyzer. So here's some examples: facilitator or director, summarizer, questioner. That's always a really popular one among my students. Illustrator, graphic artists for sketch artists for the visual learners, connectors for connecting ideas to your personal life or your community. Literary luminary or word whiz is all about vocabulary. Character critic, I haven't tried that one, but I'm really curious about that one. And wildcard, you could just say, you could ask students to come up with their own kind of role that they want to use to look at the text. And so you can see how having a different set of roles actually allows a group to co-construct a really comprehensive picture of the text when you have 4 or 5 or 6 of these different roles working in a small group. So here are 2 examples. It's not one form, it's actually 2 forms side by side. And when I assign a role to a student, I give them a form like this. There's actually, like I said, 2 forms, one called Diction Detective Role Sheet and the other one called Bridge Builder Role Sheet. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to this version. I'm going to give you several links. This is level 1 version that you can look at a little more closely so you don't have to try to read on your screen. But these kinds of forms really guide the students' reading at home, and that's a place for them to collect information in a structured way. So they kind of know what to look at and what to think about. And they bring this completed form back to class on the day that the literary circles meet. And for me, I do that once a week. Now you can Google simpler, more complex versions of this, but this is where I started several years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago. I started with this really basic, take these notes in this kind of graphic organizer, this kind of outline. Here are 2 more examples that I used at that time. One was a reporter role sheet and one was artist role sheet. And I do think it's important here to limit the amount of information a student collects on this form. It shouldn't really be overwhelming. You know, it's notes, it's not a test. And so in my opinion, I try to make these forms take no more than maybe 5 minutes to share out in their group. So when they read and they take notes and they bring it to class to share out in small groups, I don't think they should have I think they should be able to share out their information about 5 minutes or so, because if you imagine you're in a group of 4 or 5 people and each person has 5 minutes, all of a sudden you have a half hour of your class time, which is good. It's actually very productive, but of course we're all focused on time management as well. So I think 5 minutes is probably a reasonable target. So if we think about how to implement a level 1 sort of literary circle, first, students are assigned to read a chapter or a short story or whatever the text is at home. And each student is assigned a role and given their worksheet to complete as they need. And then students bring their completed worksheet to class to share in small groups. Small groups discuss the reading from the different perspective of each role. They share out what they brought. And then as an instructor, I collect these completed forms, I review them, I fill in any gaps. I don't really grade them and I don't really make any strong corrections other than if there's a real glaring error that I want to fill in on. Often I'll write a question that sort of extends their thinking. So one little caveat about this, because I really don't grade them specifically. Sometimes I'll do participation points, maybe on a 4-point scale, something like that. Like, yes, you did it and it's complete, or something's, there's a substantial part missing, or you just didn't do anything, something like that. But I will walk around the room and take a look at their forms to say, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And just this week, I had a couple of students who hadn't brought notes to class. And I'm like, okay, we need to think about how we can make sure that everybody can participate. So this is a really basic way of implementing literary circles. And some advantages I find in this, just as really level one, are our preparation, right? Less stress for students because they come to class knowing that they have something to say. They don't have to think it up on the spot. They don't have to worry about vocabulary or grammar, because they can have notes with them. And because of that, everyone participates more. Everyone has a job to do. Everyone contributes something. And even if a student is absent and misses the discussion, they still have participated by completing the form. And then there's independence. The instructor here doesn't usually participate very closely, except for maybe error correction at the end, right? And so this really gives students a sense of independence, that they take ownership of their reading and their participation in the study groups and the literary circles, without having the teacher sort of hovering over. No helicopter teaching here. So I think they work really well, but we can take it up a level and make it a jigsaw. And so for a jigsaw, it kind of works the same way, right? Students do the at-home part the same, but then in class, we do 2 group meetings instead of 1. So first, the students meet with everybody who had the same role. So all of the summarizers meet together first. All of the word wizards meet together. And I encourage them to, share their notes. Here, I'm encouraging copy from each other. Share what you learned and add to your notes. Fill in the gaps. Clarify any questions you had. And then we move to part 2, where they meet in groups where each person in the group had a different role, and then they're even more prepared to share out even richer information. Now, one caveat about a jigsaw is it takes a lot more time. It could easily take an hour, maybe even more. I mean, it's quality time, but you have to allow for it, because if you cut it too short, then it's not really doing any good. So we have to think about how we want to incorporate this upper level jigsaw or second level jigsaw. So some advantages now of taking up a level is, I think, the repetition. Confidence is built around the ideas. Confidence is built, and ideas are really, we're honing those ideas. We're really sharpening the ideas by giving them a chance to share them more than once, right? They can share their idea once in the first group, get some feedback, share it again in the second group. They're having multiple times of engaging with these, not only the text, but also their opinions or whatever they were responsible for. The other advantage, I think, in this level is diversity. And students really have a chance to hear more perspectives because they work in 2 different groups. So they're working with more people, but they also, in that first group, they're working with different people who had the same questions. So they're going to be able to have more diverse answers to that one question. And then because they're working in 2 groups, they get to work with twice as many people. And I think that diversity is really important if you have static discussion groups that don't change. So for example, if you decide that you want to have a core book club group, well, break it into a jigsaw allows students to work with other students and a core club, a core group. So if that's something that you feel strongly about, then a jigsaw kind of does both things. But a jigsaw can be leveled up. We can level up one more to level 3. And in level 3, I started splitting the notes or splitting the preparation into 2 steps. And because so far the students have really been only sharing their work, right? Everyone else has been pretty passive listening and maybe some discussion, I hope, right? But we can make it even more interactive and more collaborative by using a sort of a new version of these guided reading forms that I've started working with. And I've divided the responsibilities here so that each student does half their work at home and then they complete the other half of the task collaboratively in their small groups in the class. And this has led to really active discussion and sharing that goes beyond just reading your notes to somebody else and maybe writing down what somebody else said. So it's really even a stronger co-construction of information. So here's some examples of what this new type of form looked like at the beginning. This is from a maybe still pre-pandemic, I guess. So this is the next version. And you'll see here, well, that I have these are again, two versions. On the left is director, on the right is investigator. And investigator was either vocabulary or ideas, things like that. But you'll see two parts here. The part at the top that is like the white boxes, and then you'll see the gray boxes down below. And so the white part students do at home, and then when they come to class, that's when they completed the gray part. And we're kind of like trying to build some more interaction. And you can kind of get creative with the actual layout and division of work, but the idea is that, yeah, I'm bringing something to class and I still need to get something from my classmates. You know, I still need to work together. Here's the other two that I used in that group of four: question master and creator. And creator was a sort of an extension of the artist, because sometimes people felt intimidated when it was called an artist role. So I tried to be more generic and make it creator, make something, right? Make something. Still was a little, students are a little intimidated by that yet still, because they're like, what is that? How does that connect to reading? Like if I make a model or make a picture or something, but sometimes it can lead to really interesting things. Two more caveats about this level is, of course, now that I'm asking them to get something from their classmates in their small groups, those gray boxes, there are sometimes I had once in a while I had a student come up to me and say, my classmates didn't answer the question. I couldn't get anything from them. I have nothing to write in these gray boxes. And I'm pretty lenient in those cases, but I still try to help the student understand, well, how could we get something from our classmates? How can we better elicit information from them? Or simply build on what you heard, like what could you report that the discussion was, and instead of an explicit answer from another student. So that is one caveat that sometimes you'll run into is a student saying, well, my group didn't answer that question, so I don't know what to put here. The other caveat is that now, because we're doing co-construction, it's more time. It's another time consideration. It's time well spent, but because the learning's all coming from each other, right? But it does take more time. And I don't provide answer keys because often there's no one right answer. And so it takes a lot of time for them to do this co-construction of information in their small groups. And especially if you still do the jigsaw, because you could do this without the jigsaw. And that's the other caveat I should mention, is that if you do a jigsaw with this split note thing, sometimes the students don't know whether to answer the in-class part in their first group or in their second group. And so that might be something to think about too, as we move forward through these different variations. So level 3 implementation is the same as before, except for now, as I said, students complete half at home and half in the class, and it can be used with or without the jigsaw. And then some advantages I see of taking it up to this level 3 is the collaboration, right? The students really get more of a chance to work together. And I think it adds a layer of critical thinking, because the students are now questioning each other or trying to determine what to write down on the paper as a group. What would be the best answer and why? And so I think we're adding a layer of critical thinking. But I have taken this up one more level when we went remote for the pandemic, and that was because we had to start using Google Docs, right? And I didn't have paper anymore, so I had to start using Google Docs. And of course, I loved Google Docs, and I love the ability that we can share and collaborate. And so here are two examples of what they look like now. This is what I used last summer, or last term really. And you'll see here are two examples for director investigator, and I'll put the link to this document in the chat. And so in this scenario, I set up one Google Doc per group. So I have 4 roles in director, investigator, and we'll see the other 2 in a second. And I create one Google document with Page 1 has the instructions and the assignment of who's director, who's investigator. Page 2, 3, 4, 5 had the 4 roles, 1 page for each role. And I give one document per group. So if I have 16 people, I'll have 4 documents that I create. And to make it easier on me, I don't try to do the sharing settings specifically. I just make it open to anyone to come in, and don't worry about the restrictions so that anybody can open the document. So far, that hasn't been a problem that we had any nefarious things going on. But it was also an intentional, not only to make it easier on myself, but intentional so that at the end of the term, any student would be able to go back in and look at any information in order to review for a final assessment. So in this one Google document, the 4 students would be reading at home, and they would all be working in the one Google document, those 4 students in their group, and they would be typing in their box in the top section. In my case, it looks like red or maroon colored section of each page. They would do that part at home. And if you know Google Docs, those boxes are really small right now, but they get bigger if you type a lot. They'll just expand. So we do the split notes. So the first half at home, they bring in class, then on Zoom, they'll be working on the blue part. They all the time though, they can see each other's paper without a problem. Anyone can type. You can still do a jigsaw with these, and it just works really well for them to be able to see and share each other. They take a lot more ownership, I think, when they're able to see and work together like that. The other interesting thing about, because of shared Google Docs, is that when I put them in breakout rooms on Zoom, if somebody's zooming in on their phone and they can't really type the blue, the in-class portion, somebody else is there and probably can type for them. They can take notes for them. So that shared Google Doc and everyone working together has worked really well for that regard, for technical things. Here are the other 2 roles that I used in my Zoom presentation, or Zoom class: questioner and connector. And as I said before, the boxes are small now, but of course they expand as you type in them. Let's see. Okay, so the other good thing about Google Docs is now I can use the comments feature as the instructor to give feedback. I can see what they're typing. When I visit a breakout room, I can see what they're typing right there, and I can join in the conversation if I feel it's necessary. But most importantly, after it's all said and done, class is over, I go back into the document and I review it quickly. Again, I'm not really grading it for a grade, other than I'm looking for, is it done? Do they have some interesting things? Is it complete? Have they put in some effort to think about what I'm asking them to look at? But I do leave a comment, usually 1 per student. And sometimes I'm just saying, hey, that was something really positive, or I'm asking a question. And if something is, glaringly wrong, I'll have a chance to offer a gentle correction. But the idea that now I can participate too after the fact, I'm not interfering with their conversation, but I'm able to add another layer onto it, I think was really important and really helpful. So if we think about level 4 implementation, first, there's a little bit of technical background here we need to do. The teacher creates the Google document for each literary circle, and the Google document, my Google document, has instructions at the top. So they always have the instructions and they always know which role that they have. So I pre-fill those in. I set up a template and then I put in the names at the top. And then I share links to these documents on our LMS, which is D2L. And then before class, students complete the first half of their page at home in the shared Google document. And when they come to class and work in breakout rooms, they work on the second part to finish it, just like before. Let's see. Interesting outcome I wrote here. Let's see. Most students read the comment. Oh, this was interesting outcome was when I leave comments in the Google document, most students actually read them and often reply to me. And this is not something that happened to me when I was using the paper forms, right? Because I would write a comment and then it goes in their folder and it's done. But because Google Documents comments feature has that little blank box underneath, I think they feel like they need to reply. So often they do, not always, but often especially if I put a question in, the student will reply to it. I'm like, wow, so we've really leveled it up. We've taken it to another level just because of that. that interaction. Yeah, so that was fun. Now, a caveat here is the technical stuff, right? Everybody needs to be comfortable using Google Docs. And this did take me a lot of time on my end to set up all these documents. Even though I had a template, I had to create a copy for each group. So that's, in my case, that was 4. And then in each one, I had to I put in the name of the person next to the job. So I put, so and so is the summarizer, so and so is the questioner. So there was no question of what jobs they were doing. And then I had to take those links and put them on D2L so that students could get to them. So that's a little bit of work on my end. And I think actually I had 5 groups, and I think I ended up having 8 stories or 8 weeks of this. So that's 40 different documents that I was creating. And so that can be a little tricky if you don't feel comfortable using Google Docs and sharing Google Docs. Yeah, and sometimes so to make it easy, I shared all the links, right? I didn't make them specific to the 4 people. And another reason to do that was to make it easy for later for review, but also if somebody needs to change groups, for example, you can easily just give them the new link without having to add their specific permissions. So I think if you have a tech-savvy class at a super high level, you could provide maybe one template and ask them to copy it. But I'm trying to make it easy the first time around at least. So some advantages at this higher level, I think, is cohesion. Students really took ownership as a group, not just individually, but as a group. They really, I would see notes at the bottom from one group member to everyone else in their group saying, thank you all, it was really great to work with you this time. And so I think I felt this really bonding, I think, that I didn't see in other levels. The teacher presence now, I think, works really well. When I do this in class, of course, I kind of mingle around and eavesdrop and see what everyone's doing. But now I can really participate without without intruding, basically, less obtrusive sort of participation. And then I think sharing was really a nice part of this. Classmates can use everybody else's material, see what everybody else wrote, maybe use it to study if you have a final assessment, things like that. And of course, working online, easy edits, no paper, no lost homework, and it can really accommodate media. And I haven't tried that one. That might be the next level, is to say, okay, how do we now incorporate multimedia into these literary circles? So if we take a look back at what we talked about, the different levels of complexity, we started with level 1, just assigning roles and giving them the prompts to collect information to bring back to class. That is huge. That's huge, as opposed to just having open dialogue in class. Then making it a jigsaw really allows more diversity. Splitting the notes allows us to collaborate, and then sharing Google Docs allows those extra bells and whistles and an inobtrusive teacher presence. So you have a lot of choice of where you would like to try this kind of activity and how to shape it based on the different kinds of roles or the different kinds of questions, because even within the role of, say, summarizer, you might tweak the question or the prompt to be more specific to what you want and what you need. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy you're here, and here's my contact information. And I'm going to also just do a self-plug. Let's see if I can get this copied. Whoops. I wanted to put a plug in there for my OER site that has all of my OER materials that you can also see on my Padlet presentation today, but I'll put that link in there. And then you also have the link to the slides. So that's all I have for you. I was open to questions if you have questions, and I wasn't paying attention to the chat, so maybe Jennifer can help me.
Yeah, sure.
Work
Thank
through
you so
those.
much, Tim. We have about 15 minutes, I think, for questions and discussion. And I see Davida has her hand raised, but I'm gonna ask, or head, did you put it down? Yeah, okay. Okay. So I'm gonna ask one question first and then move to Davida. Thanks for putting it back up there. Yeah, we had at least one question, and I had the question too. If the levels, if you had them associated with any particular class levels, or if it's like a technology level, or it's just like these are all different ways to implement it.
Mostly all different ways to implement it, and sort of what fit my style and what I wanted to get from my students. But I think technology is a big part of it. So if you're not comfortable using Google Docs, then that level just it may not work for you. But as far as whether you do a jigsaw or not, I think some of that's limited by time. And then if you do the work at home and work in class, that's probably more of like, I think that could be any level. Yeah, it's just the prompt would be simplified probably. The prompt would be simplified, but you could still have that, do this at home, but do this together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Davida, yeah, what's your question?
Two questions. Thank you, Tim. That was awesome. I'm curious, what is the smallest group of students that you've done this with? Like, what if you had a class of like, I don't know, 11 students? Is it
Yeah.
still feasible?
Oh yeah, I think with 11, yeah, because you could still do just 2 groups, I guess, or 3. But if you had only a group of like, or a class of like, 6 or 8, it might get a little challenging. I think it would end up being a little more static, and so might have to think of different ways to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, like I was wondering
But
if it could work in pairs or if that kind of doesn't.
yeah,
It's not
well,
a
yeah,
circle.
I suppose. I mean, yeah, it's not a circle. That would be an interesting adaptation to see how that would work and what would you need to change to make it work for pair work instead of group work. I think
Yeah.
the principles remain the same though, right? The idea that we're giving students, asking them to come prepared with something. We could say, don't stress about what you're going to say. Here's what I want you to focus on. So I'm going to answer this question and bring it, and I'm ready to share. I'm not trying to think on the spot. So I think those principles remain the same no matter what your group is, what the size of your group is. I think
Okay,
that
and my
comes.
second,
Mhm.
thank you. Sorry, my second question is, have you had them like have their laptops in the computer in the classroom, type it on the Google Docs,
Mm-hmm.
or do you
Yeah,
have
that's
you just
happening right
taped that?
now. Yeah,
You're doing
because
that, okay.
what I showed you today was what I did in the summer, which was on Zoom, and so that everybody was on Google Docs, while they're on their computer, right? Because everyone was on their computer. But now I'm back face to face, and I'm doing a similar circles kind of activity, and I would say maybe out of 20 students, maybe 4 or 5 have their computers with them every day taking notes. And I've noticed that they working in the Google document, that they're not sharing a Google document right in this term, but people are using the form to take their notes. So yeah, I guess that's not exactly the same as what you're asking, because what I'm doing right now isn't as connected as that example from the last summer, because I'm still using paper, and so they can see each other's paper, but it's different than having that shared Google document, isn't it? And so that's why I thought, oh, this is really a little bit stronger when it was on Zoom, because I'm not a big fan of teaching on Zoom, really, to be honest. But I thought, well, that was one point where really it did seem to work better than even on paper, was because they had that sort of group connection in that one Google document. It really, lots of cohesion there.
Right, I have done Google Docs live in person. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
quiet, but there's so much communication going on
Mm-hmm.
that you can do it. Like you think about how much more they can sometimes express themselves with the written word versus speaking to each other in a
Yeah,
group. So it's not totally intuitive to use shared Google Docs in a class, but it can be
sure.
really cool. So if I'm thinking of how I would implement what you're doing, I might have the Chrome cart and
Absolutely.
everybody
And you could
do
still
it.
do the at-home part, and then everyone has the Chromebook in class or their own laptop in class and can do that part in class, even though it's not on paper, it's digital. Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Thank
Yeah, thanks, Davida. And I have a couple other questions that were asked.
Yeah.
One of them was especially for when you have the at home and the in class, do you have any gap filler for the students who didn't do the work that they were assigned to do at home? Um, I know that's always a challenge.
Yeah, that's where I like the jigsaw, because if they didn't do the work at home, then I specifically say, make sure you pay attention to this first group then and take some notes, because you will be expected to share that in your second group. So even though they weren't the creator of those notes, they're still getting that information from the first small group. And if they did the first, and if it's the opposite is true, they did the homework, but they missed the discussion, then they could, I really focus on what they did at home. I mean, they could still answer the second part by themselves. It just won't be interactive with their students. So usually the second part is an extension of the first part. It's not like something completely different or dependent on a group. It's like, I looked up these 3 words. These were my vocabulary words that were, because I was the word wizard. Now we got to add 2 more that you thought. So instead of doing 2 from their classmates, they would just do 2 more on their own. So I think there are ways for them to continue to use these forms and do the whole piece, even though they might be doing some by themselves because they were absent.
And what kind of literature have you used?
All kinds. I've done this with regular novels like Exit West that I've used. Any novel that I've used, I think I've done this. And then I've also been using an anthology of short stories by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie that worked really well. And this term, Davida and I put together a collection or an anthology of short stories from the outer circle of world Englishes. So I'm using those this term, but it has worked with a novel, it's worked with short stories. I imagine it would work with any kind of collection of text that you're looking at. Because you can change the questions, right? Because if it's not a fiction piece, you don't have to, you just don't do the plot question, you do something else.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm teaching like a writing class, and I have a humanities class that I think I could adapt this to, even when we're not reading our novel or we're not reading fiction, just to assign different ones.
When I worked with the DJ stories, I think 2 of those were TED Talks, so there were speeches, and one of them was, I either used reviews from like The Guardian and New York Times, or I used her Facebook posts because she had some interesting conversations on Facebook that they offered a new glimpse of her as an author. And so I used it with lots of different types of materials. I think, come to think of it, those stories, some were fiction, some were nonfiction. And actually that was kind of a question with some essays she wrote for either the New Yorker or the New York Times, was like, is this fiction or is this biography, right? So it really helped, I think, focus on the things that I was hoping they would look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and I heard you say that you don't usually grade this, but I'm wondering if it is tied to some other assessment that they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, I do. I do give them sort of that participation points in order to make sure that they're accountable for doing it. Like I said, maybe like 3 or 4 point scale kind of thing. But the bigger assessment does come at the end. I will say, because I see such quality work in their forms, I feel very comfortable not giving an exam on the book. But what I do ask them to do is I ask them to do a reflection essay. And generally, if I used a variety of short stories, I've been asking them to compare and contrast 2 of the stories, usually a fiction and a nonfiction in the case of Adichie. And in the case this term, I'll probably ask them from 2 different parts of the world, so 2 different cultures. If I were using a single book, like Exit West or something like that, then I would probably, offer a different kind of prompt, but it would be more of a reflection essay at the end, rather than a formal graded quiz or exam, because I see such good quality from the literary circles that I know they've been engaged. And so I don't need to say, what happened, what was the plot, or when did this happen? All those things are already done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. One of the questions that just came up was to learn more about what your classes are. What are the courses that you're using this in?
Oh, reading courses. And I've used this in different levels. So definitely 6, 7, 8. We have 8 levels at PCC. So 6, 7, 8 are the advanced levels. I'm sure if you just adjust the wording and adjust the questions and tasks, you could still use the principle in probably almost any level. The idea that they have a role, they have a job. And so there's less stress because I know what I'm going to do. And then when they come to talk, I have something to say.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, are there other questions that haven't been put in the chat?
Yeah, Laura said, yeah, high, intermediate to advanced. Yeah, I wonder if I even use them in 6. Definitely 7 and 8 is something I use them regularly in the advanced sections.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
It
know.
seems like it'll be, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead,
I was
Davina.
gonna say, it seems like it would be good for, you were saying, Tim, it's like a book club, but like if you're in an actual book club, not in the classroom, and
Yeah.
people don't read the book, like it
Oh,
would
yeah.
maybe force them or motivate them to read the book if they know they have a role. I mean, it is maybe too much like school. Maybe some people wouldn't like it, but might work for some people. I'm gonna think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
a convert. It's really, and it's like Laura's saying, once you realize that what they do in these literary circles, you feel less stress about it. I totally feel lots of less. I've been able to let go a lot about teaching the book because we have a skills book, right? I have a regular textbook that teaches the reading skills, but here we're actually like the extensive reading, reading for enjoyment, reading for something other than focusing on the skills and getting something out of it. I think it's that whole what does it say, what does it mean? So the skills that we're looking at, what does it literally say? And then now at the book we're saying, what do these things mean? And because of getting such good feedback, it really takes a lot of stress off of me. My big stress now is just to stay back and stay out of the groups while they're talking. But that's what's great about if you do this on Zoom. I don't go into the groups. I mean, I do drop into each breakout room once to say, do you have any questions? And then I leave. And then I get to look at their forms after. I mean, I could even have them open while they're doing it. I do that sometimes with other exercises, but usually I just wait at the end. And that's where I can offer just, a little question or compliment or encouragement. And I think for me, that's just sort of just changed my perspective of how do I teach a novel? How do I teach literature?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the beginning, before we got started, you were talking about opinion circles. Do you have
That's the
any
variation I'm
there?
trying this term. Is this term I'm teaching these short stories, and I'm trying to even take it up, I guess, another level of digging deeper. This is for level 8 of 8, so it's the most advanced ESOL students. And David and I are working on this site together where we've curated a list of stories from the outer circle of world Englishes. And so they're from all these other countries where people are still writing natively in English or as a second language in English. And so instead of the roles of like summarizer and word wizard and things like that, this time I'm trying a little bit different where we have created an interactive site to sort of take care of the nuts and bolts at home. They read and they have interactive activities that they can do, test the plot and the character and those kinds of things, the time when it was written. And then when they come to class, they're actually, I've given each student this opinion question. So they're open-ended opinion questions about the story. No right answer really, right? Everybody can come up with a different answer. And then we do a jigsaw in class. And then they go home and so like 3 levels, I guess. They prepare at home, they talk in class, but instead of taking notes in class, they have an extension question then to say that, which is like the connection question. How do I connect this to my life? So like, go look at the author's Instagram. What can we learn about that? Or how this person is doing a lot of code switching. How does that happen in your life? Things like that.
Mhm.
So it's really trying to level up the engagement beyond the nuts and bolts, but it isn't exactly the roles. So the principle's the same. I give them something to think about. They come to class prepared to share. They share to co-construct information, but now they're going to go home and do one more layer where they like, what does it mean to me, right? Extend their thinking a little bit. So we're testing it to see how it works. I got the first batch Thursday night, and I'm going to read them this weekend to see what were the notes. The conversations in class were wonderful. And it's just an interesting way of doing it. So there's a little bit of a tweak on how we're doing it this term. And I'm not sure which is better. We'll see.
Okay. Well, I know I feel really grateful that you have helped me. You just wrote my lesson plan for Carlos Bolasan, which I'm teaching at the end of this term. So thanks a lot for helping me with that. And I guess we need to wrap it up. We've got
Oh,
about 5 minutes before we need to be back in the main TESOL
sure.
room. And Linda has a question too. So at 11:35, there is a lunch session hearing updates about the TESOL convention happening in Portland this year. So grab your lunch. Yes, Linda. And here's the link.
Quick, I'll be quick. I
Sure.
just wonder how many students keep coming back for your classes as they go up in level?
Oh, you mean from, well, I teach a different class every term. So even if they wanted to come back, I may not be offering what they need the next term, right? Because I may teach this class and the next term I teach a lower level instead of a higher level. So, but I do usually have 2 or 3 familiar faces, and I get really good feedback on the course evaluations. I've had nobody complain about them. That's one baseline, but I also get real positive comments about the ability to have time to talk with each other was an important one that comes out a lot, as opposed to, listening to me talk or just the question, the asking questions and getting single answers. So, and there's a lot, the energy goes up in the room when you do it. I think even online, even in the breakout rooms, I think the energy goes up with these because, we're all sort of shy group work, but when we know what we have to share, it just gives us that access and lets us really like take away some stress and join in.
Mhm. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Tim.
You're welcome. Thanks for everybody for
Everyone.
coming. Enjoy the rest of the day. And if you have any questions, I'll wait for a few minutes, but otherwise I'll see you in the other room soon. Thanks, everybody.